Here.
Commissioner Caslen,
Here.
Mayor Watson,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Maglinger,
Here.
Commissioner Glenn.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Item 3 is ordinance, second reading. We'll have a roll call vote. Ms. Carrico.
Ordinance 14-2022, an ordinance amending ordinance 9-2022 to establish revised compensation for city employees and non-elected city officers in accordance with the personnel and pay classification plan as required by KRS 838.070, read for approval on second reading this 12th day of July 2022.
Thank you. I'll make a motion to approve. Could I have a second, please?
Second.
City Manager, any further discussion?
No, Mayor, I described it at the last meeting. Unless there are no questions, we're good to proceed.
Thank you. Any discussion from the dais? Hearing none, we'll have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Sanford,
Yes.
Commissioner Caslen,
Yes.
Mayor Watson,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Maglinger,
Yes.
Commissioner Glenn.
Yes.
Thank you. Item 3B. Ms. Carrico.
Ordinance 15-2022, an ordinance amending the Owensboro zoning ordinance adopted March 14th, 1980, so as to include within the B2 Central Business Zone property located at 407 East 3rd Street, read for approval on second reading this 12th day of July 2022.
Thank you. I'll make a motion to approve this. Could I have a second, please?
Second.
City Manager.
Mayor, we'll just briefly comment, because this item is a little different. This is second reading of an ordinance rezoning 407 recently approved this rezoning. However, an appeal was filed asking for the Board of Commissioners to reconsider the action of the Planning Commission. However, the person who filed the appeal has not appeared to plead their case. As a result, this is second reading of an ordinance to approve and affirm the rezoning as approved by the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Roll call, Ms. Carrico.
Commissioner Caslen,
Yes.
Mayor Watson,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Maglinger,
Yes.
Commissioner Glenn,
Yes.
Commissioner Sanford.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion is approved. Okay, item 4, City Manager item.
Thank you, Mayor. Today for your consideration, we have the following personnel appointments. Colton Baker, probationary full-time non-civil service appointment to police officer with the police department effective July 18th. Cameron Weaver, probationary full-time non-civil service appointment to police officer with the police department effective July 18th. Jacob Trogdon, probationary full-time non-civil service promotional appointment to crew leader with the street department effective July 17th. Joshua Jones, regular full-time non-civil service appointment to firefighter with the fire department effective May 8th. Dina Payne, regular full-time non-civil service appointment to network systems technician with the information technology department effective July 4th. And Cynthia Askins, regular full-time non-civil service appointment to revenue clerk with the finance department effective July 19th.
Thank you. I'll make a motion to approve these hires. Could I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. Any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 5 will be presentations. First one up, tax reduction update. City Manager Nate Pagan.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of months ago at a meeting, the mayor asked if the staff could consider the possibility of decreasing or reducing our tax rate, potentially to the rate in 2017, Mayor, I think when you got back in office. And so we've spent the last several weeks running some numbers in various scenarios, and so we do have a summary report today to present that information. I'd like to acknowledge Director of Finance and Support Services, Angela Wattinger, who of course has done a great job and carried the bulk of the weight on the work and the research that's been involved, and so it's been quite a bit of work on her part. It's been a good exercise for us. It had been several months since we'd update what we call our long-range plan, or the LRP, which is essentially a 5-year rolling financial model that we project every year. And so again, I want to acknowledge Angela, and this was a good exercise to update our numbers. we present the long-range plan every year as part of the budget work session. And so what you see before you as a starting point today is where we left off when we last discussed the long-range plan, which was in the budget work session back in April. So this is essentially what we consider a baseline budget. So going forward for the next 5 years, assuming no changes in personnel, no changes in projects or facilities, essentially what we have continuing forward for the next 5 years. And so these are the same numbers that you saw in the budget work session. You can see in the top row there where we have the 22-23 fiscal year budgets. That's the approved budget that we're currently operating in. And then you can see going across the slide there the next 5 years of forecasted budgets based on what we see now. And so again, you can see the top there with the revenue, the expenditures, and then what's probably most important for our discussion today is the third row there, the net surplus, or when it's in parentheses, a negative, which represents a deficit. So these again are the numbers you saw at the work session. Most of the time on the LRP, the out years show a deficit, so this is not concerning to us at all from that perspective. That's a number that's easily correctable during the budget process as we navigate that each year. So status quo would be right now in a very comfortable position. However, since we presented these numbers back in April, there have been a few changes of consequence of the broader economic conditions. And so these are some new information or developments that we've experienced mostly on the expense side in the last 3 or 4 months through bids that we've opened. So you can see there that our paving materials went up 57% for the year. Our sign materials, 44%. And we don't talk a lot about signs, but I think the city has about 10,000 street signs and stop signs that we maintain. We have a crew at Public Works who really does nothing but signs. So it is a large expenditure for us at times. Cleaning services, mowing services, fuel, as you all experience in your personal lives as well, have gone up. I sometimes joke that we have not a joke, but we have a huge fleet here at the city and emergency response vehicles and public works vehicles and fire vehicles. They're very effective at what they do, but they're not always the most fuel efficient, so we do use a considerable amount of fuel at the city. And so all of these impacts we've experienced just really since in April or May over the last few months. There is one good development. I would say that, as you know, over the last several years, we've been saving for our future pension costs, and so we've built up a nice reserve account in our pension reserve account, which we've actually drawn down from in the past. Now we understand from our colleagues at the state that implementation is more or less fully phased in, and so over the next 4 to 5 years, we anticipate drawing money down from that as well. So for purposes of our discussion today, we assume drawing down that pension reserve account over the next 5 years at $700,000 per year in extra revenue. So this slide represents essentially that. Looking at the first slide and then changes based on what we just discussed on those various costs that have gone up because of inflationary pressures over the last few months. But then also that's in large part offset by the increase in revenue of $700,000 that we anticipate drawing down from that pension reserve account over the next few years. So the numbers aren't substantially different than what you saw on the previous version of this LRP. So slightly larger deficits in the out years, but again, nothing that's overly concerning and something that we could easily address every year as we navigate the budget process. However, there are other projects under consideration that we've talked about, in fact, one that we'll talk about later in the meeting. So we wanted to do a version of the long-range plan incorporating some assumptions, very broad assumptions about these projects. So one of those that we'll hear briefly is the Sportsplex. So for purpose of the Sportsplex, we just assumed what we would have as our maintenance costs for replacement plan costs, which is $307 per year. That number could be better if the facility generates more revenue, so that number could be lower. If it operates at a deficit, the number for the Sportsplex could be higher. So we just knew what we knew would be a fixed cost there. Anticipate it being slightly lower, but wanted to go with the conservative approach. Another potential project that we've discussed is a transient dock. So this number assumes the debt service for the dock, and then what we estimate is the annual operating cost based on research that we've done from our colleagues in Paducah and what they've experienced on their costs. So this is a number for the debt service and the operating costs for the dock that we would anticipate for the next 20 or so years as we would potentially pay off that bond if and when that project were to proceed. And then finally, another consideration that we've talked about over the last few months is a wage adjustment. I know Mayor, you even made a comment at the budget work session that we talk about the challenges that we've had over the years, and it's kind of a recurring theme. And so there was even a comment about let's address it. And so staff and Josh Bachmeyer is working on an RFP to have a wage analysis or compensation survey done. So we just put something in as a placeholder. This is not anything that's been done or formalized yet. So it's just something to have consider. Excuse me.
Go ahead,
It's a future consideration.
Yeah, and could you expand a little bit on the wage adjustments of us, our employees versus the private sector, and how we lose a lot of good people to the private sector? And that's kind of where this fits into, I think.
Right, that's exactly right. Obviously, we're having a lot of turnover and losing not as much to other public agencies, some, but more so to private sector industries as well. And so, and Josh has done some preliminary research and would probably say we're underpaid substantially by 15 to 20%, generally speaking. And so that's something that we'll address through a formal wage survey. So that'll be a lengthy process that we would bring back to you for vetting in the future, and then any potential changes could potentially be implemented in next year's budget. So it's a several month process, Mayor. But we thought it was a big enough issue we should at least incorporate in some form or fashion as a placeholder, like these other projects, that if they move forward, it would obviously have a substantial impact on our financial picture. So
you're saying it's a 2 or 3 month process to get us those numbers?
To get the numbers from the consultant, yes. I anticipate probably that RFP may go out in the next month or two, get somebody on board in the fall, with the goal to have it done in December or January to present to you, and then potentially as we start drafting the next year's budget in January or February to have in place at that point. So incorporating all of these other considerations in a revised, updated LRP, you can see there on the third line item on the net deficit or surplus line, those numbers do look much worse, because that previous slide did indicate quite a bit of capital cost and investment in our employees and operations. So you see that reflected here through additional costs. All of these numbers that we've looked at so far have made no changes to our tax rates. They have assumed at this point all on our current rates and no changes. As you know, in 2017, the city did undertake a series of tax rate increases. And at the time, the occupational tax went from a total rate of 1.39 up to 1.78, and the insurance premium license fee went from 8% to 10%. So we wanted to run a version of the long-range plan, taking those numbers back to the 2017 amounts. Okay, so that is reverting the occupational from 1.78 down to 1.39, and reverting the insurance premium down from 10 to 8%. So then when looking at that most recent LRP that you saw with the reduced revenues, you can see that it has a substantial impact on the third line there on the net deficits. And the deficits get rather large rather quickly because of those additional costs and projects, and then in large part hereby a substantial decrease in the revenues. So we looked at an alternative reduction as well. Instead of looking at reverting fully back to the 2017 rates, could we do something in between? And so we did a scenario as well, looking at a smaller decrease in the occupational tax from 1.78 down to 1.5, while retaining the current rate at 10% for the insurance premium tax. And so as you would imagine, the numbers look a little bit better because it's a smaller decrease in the occupational rate and then no decrease in the insurance premium rate, but still a substantial deficit potentially in the $9 to $10 million range over the next several years. And when talking about tax rates, I think it's helpful to look at some contextual information. So we did compile some of the occupational rates from some of the other similar cities across the Commonwealth, just to provide some context. So you can see on the slide, these are just ranking from top to bottom there at highest rate. Newport at 2.5. We compare relatively well, or very well, in this metric compared to our peer cities, even at Bowling Green and Hopkinsville, and some that are even more in Western Kentucky, as opposed to Newport and Covington that are in Northern Kentucky. Henderson's Tech obviously stands out as having a lower rate, but you'll see why in a minute. A similar comparison for insurance premium and license fees. Again, we find ourselves in a competitive position in the middle or just below the middle of this group as well. So certainly have a competitive insurance premium rate as well. And then finally, looking at our third biggest general fund tax source is property tax. And so here's where you see the offset at Henderson, how they had a much lower occupational rate, but they've made it up in the property tax, just a policy decision that they've made over the years to have a higher property tax rate and keep the occupational rate lower. I point out here as well, if you look at Bowling Green and Frankfort, they're quite a bit lower than the others. If you think about those communities with the presence of WKU and Bowling Green, and then of course the state office properties in Frankfort, those are all tax exempt properties, so it would make sense that Bowling Green and Frankfort would minimize the property tax because of the amount of tax exempt property within those jurisdictions. So if you look at that consideration, look at Henderson, again, we're in the middle of the pack and have a very competitive rate structure overall.
From your knowledge, why would you choose to do what Henderson did versus what we're doing? What's the logic behind that?
I do not know. Probably the property tax is a little bit more stable, and Angela, jump in if you have a different or enhanced perspective. The property tax is probably a little bit, no. Yeah, it is, because obviously they stand out a little bit. And so again, I think the property tax is a little bit more stable, whereas the occupational is subject to a little bit more variability and it's subject to the economic cycle. So if there's a large downturn or an 07 or 08 type of situation with a lot of job layoffs, then that scenario is more elastic, I guess is the term, and then it sees a greater decrease, and so it's more responsive to economic trends. The property tax is a little bit more stable historically.
Mm-hmm. No, you summed it up very well.
So if you're making less money, property taxes aren't going down, right?
That's correct.
So that's why I'm trying to begin a math nation. Go ahead. Process. Exactly.
And actually, I know that they've, over the last few years, taken some steps to get in line with other cities. Their occupational tax, I believe, was as low as 1% 6-8 years ago. And so they've increased that a couple times over the last few years to try to get to a closer balance to other cities, but they're not there yet. Now, prior to that that 2017 tax rate increases that we've discussed, the city did unfortunately experience a couple of downgrades in their bond rating. So we've subsequently gotten one of those steps back increased, but we're still one short of where we were from a bond rating perspective. And our most recent comments from Moody's I thought were relevant as well. And so just some of the comments that they've made about our financial status, that we're a regionally important economy with a history of stable tax-based growth. We've demonstrated through that 2017 action a willingness and ability to increase taxes, which has resulted in an improving financial position. They do comment on factors that could lead to a downgrade, such as material declines in our tax base, which we've not seen, a significant increase in our debt burden, and then ultimately a trend of a structural imbalance resulting in a deteriorated financial position. And so I think that would be particularly relevant looking at some of those long-range plans that showed large deficits in the out years. In particular, that's a comment that's, I think, directly on point to this discussion.
You know, it looks like we got a pretty healthy general fund balance. You know, does that figure into what you're talking about? Or is that federal money or?
Very good points, yes. So there is some one-time federal funds in there that will be non-recurring, which to somewhat make the fund balance look higher than it otherwise would be. And then also, though, in some of those long-range plans with the out years showing substantial deficits, that fund balance gets depleted very, very quickly in that scenario. So even though it's large now, that could change very quickly in 2 or 3 years if there are large deficits for a couple of years. This is sort of a summary slide here that reflects the net effect of the last fiscal year, okay, FY22, which was completed, but through May of that year, which would have been 11 months of our last fiscal year, if we had gone from the current tax rates and reverted back to the 2017 rates, that would have had a net effect there on the bottom of $9.5 million. And so that kind of explains some of that slide you saw earlier showing the delta or the difference between current rates versus the rates from 2017, which would be $9.5 million, and that's through 11 months. Over the full fiscal year, it would be prorated for an extra month, so somewhere probably $10.25 to $10.5 million difference. Finally, wanted to look at the rate of an individual taxpayer. So this assumed, for an occupational perspective, as someone of an annual wage of $50,000 and the impact of what they would pay at a 1.39 versus a 1.78 current rate. And so they would see a savings of $7.50 for someone who is paid twice a month, which is a typical pay structure for employers in our community. So they would see a difference of $7.50 per paycheck. Similarly, looking at the median house value, which according to the Census Bureau is $125,600 in our community, with that reduction in the insurance premium tax from 10% down to 8%, they would see a $14 a year savings. I initially thought that was $14,000 a month, which is $14,000 a year. Most people pay that escrow monthly, so they don't necessarily see that as much on a bill directly because it's through their bank's escrow accounts. So in sum, Mayor, I think that the city is in a financial position that is rather strong, and that's something to be proud of. We made hard decisions in the past to put ourselves in a good position. We are on the precipice of potentially looking at various projects and initiatives that would obviously have an impact on that and draw some of that down. So I think the staff recommendation would be to not consider a tax rate deduction at this point. However, wanted to provide the information as requested, and then happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Sam.
Nate, could you go back to the first slide, the very first one? On the expense side, does that assume us at full employment, like through the police department, or does that assume us at today's employment?
Somewhere in between. So we typically budget at full employment because there's a slight chance that we may be. I think for purposes of this, we assume that we would be at 96% employment. Angela, is that right? And so there have been years we've been 92. There have been years we've been at 98% of our employment. So we assumed something that was realistic yet conservative. Okay. So it's based on actual numbers and assumes 96% of employment.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Good question.
Commissioner Glenn.
Yes, Angela, let me just, on Henderson, I actually talked to Mayor Steve Austin a couple of years ago about their tax rate thing. And one of the things I think he said is they have a lot of job drift over to Evansville. They have a lot of people that would go over to Evansville and work. Maybe they thought they were making more money, but then they like the lower living costs in Henderson. So could that be an explanation for that, the discord the mayor has identified, where you have this huge high rate for property tax versus the occupation tax?
I mean, certainly, I'm sure that would factor into it, but, you're looking at several years of different elected officials, different staff to get to a level of 49, because you can only, by statute, increase your rates to a maximum of 4% revenue increase. And so I'm sure that played into it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome.
Well, I think it's an excellent job, City Manager Nate and Angela, because it's a no-brainer if it's going to $7.50 versus what it's going to do to help our general fund. Maybe hold off another tax increase for a little while anyway, because it's not going to get any cheaper to run this city. So I appreciate the effort. Thank you very much. It wasn't a bait and switch thing that somebody said, hey, you don't really mean to do it. I really meant to do it, but it doesn't make any sense to do it.
We're happy to do it. And again, it was good information to do. We hadn't updated some of these assumptions and things in a while, so it was definitely good to go back and reanalyze these numbers.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? The next item on the agenda, I guess we call indoor sports a Sportsplex update. City Manager and Norm Gill, Pinnacle Indoor Sports.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll do a quick introduction and some, again, context, and then Norm Gill will carry the bulk of the presentation. But well, my previous position with the City of Hopkinsville, we engaged Pinnacle Indoor Sports to consult with us about a facility there. A few months after I began my employment here with the City of Owensboro, the Convention and Visitors Bureau expressed interest in a sports study, and so I referred Pinnacle as a potential consultant to CVB Director Mark Cleacher, who I know is here today as well. So Pinnacle provided a market study that considered an indoor sports facility, and then also recommended we improve Fisher Park, which we did with the subsequent renovations and improvements to Fisher, including turf infields. A few months ago, during a meeting, several of you commented about your interest in a potential indoor sports facility. As a result, we engaged Pinnacle to update their 2018 market study model estimated revenues and expenses for a proposed sports facility, and consider the economic impact such a facility would provide. So today we have with us Norm Gill, a partner at Pinnacle, who will provide an overview of their work.
Mr. Gill, state your name and address for the record, please.
Norm Gill, 7017 Cherry Grove Lane, Pee Wee Valley, Kentucky. Don't profile. Nate, you mentioned, is the clicker over there?
Yeah, sorry, I put it on the wrong one.
No, I went. So thank you all for having me. As Nate said, we did a pretty thorough exam in 2018 of this community. We've done, we do dozens and dozens of studies a year. Some of them are positive. We're very straightforward people. I used to own 6 of these facilities and understand the economics pretty well. So if we don't think something's going to work or meet the financial or community goals of a community, we're not hesitant to do so. But in this case, well, I'll tell you a little about us. Again, started back myself personally. I was a general contractor, and my kid played soccer, so I built one, which is not the business model that we advocate anybody follow. So but I subsequently went out and built 6 more of them around the country, trying to build a chain of these. And at the end of the day, what I had missed was that the sports are all the same, but every community is different. And so from a business and how they execute the sports, so our lesson from that was that it's all about the local market idiosyncrasy. So that's how we look at it. We're not putting national trends. We don't put compare it to other cities' methodologies. We look at your community, and we've interviewed dozens and dozens of local and regional folks that might be end users of this facility to understand their feelings of Owensboro and look at the demand that you would have. Basically speaking, it's positive. I'll go to the end, go to the punchline. There's nothing that has dramatically changed from 2018. We re-interviewed some of the people. We talked to additional some people that we had missed the first time around. We looked at the pandemic impacts. As an industry, the pandemic affected us very badly in that first 4, 5, 6 months when you couldn't gather. That was the crux of why we couldn't operate. As that started to wane down, it came back very quickly. And in fact, currently, from an industry standpoint, it's back at every bit of where the pre-pandemic levels were. When a community, specifically a community, is looking at a facility of this nature, generally there are two main reasons they're looking at it. And I'll ask you each time that you're thinking through a part of this, which set of glasses do you have on? There's the economic impact set, and there's a quality of life set of glasses. And each has a different goal, and each has a different audience. And so in this case, it works wonderfully when you do have a community such as Owensboro that really has a really need for both and really an opportunity for both. Generally speaking, the quality of life aspect is the Sunday night through Thursday utilization of the facility. A lot of summertime use of the facility during the day. I know, and in talking to Amanda, she's got 160 kids in her camp program, if I remember these numbers right, and got 60 on a waiting list because there's just not enough amenities. When you put on your economic impact hat, you're thinking about Friday night, Saturday, Sunday. You're thinking about bringing sports tourism in from out of town to spend the night in the hotels, to eat at your eateries, to buy your retail, and generally bring their incomes into your community. So just an important little note to think about as you're weighing the different aspects of this project. Your markets and the local market and regional market is still growing. That's a positive. It's not skyrocketing, but it's steady. Talk briefly about the pandemic recovery. And I think we also ought to mention and talk about, the conversion, which you all supported, I know financially as a partner in the purchase of the sport court or snap court surface that's down in the convention center. I think from Mark Garner that in the first 4 months of this year, he booked 15 events. And that's for a, single surface in a convention center with 4 basketball courts. So that's a pretty good trend. Oops. Don't trick me here. So balancing those 2 sets of glasses, what we're proposing that you should look at is a minimum of a 5-court, maybe even 6-court facility that would allow for regional tournaments to be attracted to this community. Tournaments in basketball, volleyball, futsal, mat sports, wrestling, other martial arts, cheerleading, dance, anything that just needs a big open surface. We've also are advocating that for a quality of life play that you, and Nate can relate to this down in Hopkinsville, that you install a 100 by 200 foot turf surface, synthetic turf surface. This will make the soccer folks really happy in the winter. You can actually put 2 Little League baseball infields on that size. You play a modified rule. You're not shagging fly balls, but it's February outside. Take what you can get, right? And additionally, if you were to run, say, in this configuration, a 10-court volleyball tournament, you would need that turf area for what they refer to as camping. There'd be so many girls, generally it's girls volleyball. But, and again, I think Amanda can smile to this, all these teams are in the building who are idle have to go somewhere. And so we would use the turf area for them to get in their little circles and camp. This is an 88,000 square foot building. I think you're in at 16, 17, we're probably closer to $16 million depending on your location and depending on the current status of steel prices, although that is going in the right direction for the moment. I mean, literally March of 2020 versus right now, steel prices have doubled, the steel building itself. Additional amenities in here would be, restrooms, concessions, administrative offices, some breakout party rooms that could be community meetings for sports organizations, et cetera. All in all, though, it's a pretty function facility. It's designed to do exactly what it's meant to. As I said, obviously the sport.
Can I just ask?
Yeah.
Are we able to interrupt you?
Interrupted.
So why did you decide on 88?
That's working. This is being recorded. I can't say that. This is a backwards approach to. Here's the amenities. I mean, a court
Here's
is.
What you want to do. This is what's outside.
Yeah.
Okay.
Courts are this big, fields this big, and then we know the amount of idle space that you need for circulation, et cetera. Again, we've designed. I'm not an architect or an engineer. I don't have any letters after my name, but I have designed and built over 60 of these around the country, and we think we're very, very helpful to a community in that facet because we're designing for function. And I know you're not a for-profit, but I don't think you want to subsidize this into perpetuity either. So if the capital costs can be minimized to get an efficient building that executes the 2 quality of life and economic impact goals, then we can be very efficient with it. We were also asked to put together a financial model. We did this, and I think these were distributed to you all. Nate told me not to go through every line item cell in it, that wasn't what you all like to do. But the 2 models we put together, one looked at it from the standpoint of the city-managed facility, where probably I'll just profile the Park and Rec Department would run it. In that model, local programming for Sunday night through Thursday is done by the Park and Rec Department. And then generally speaking, the weekends, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, are rented out to tournament promoters to come to town, similar to what's happening right now in the convention center. The basketball tournament comes in and they run everything. They get the referees, they do the schedules, they run the clock, and all the facility does is make sure the restrooms are clean and the doors are open. That's one model. In that model, with the staffing being the city, as been pointed out at prior examples in your budgeting, there's a pretty hefty disproportionate to private sector staffing expenses put into that, which is something to pay attention to. The other model you could look at is a third-party management. Now, I do know a little bit, not very much detail, but I do know a little bit about how the Spectrum and the Convention Center was structured. This is a little different than this. This is much more hands-on. With the third-party management group, they would staff it. They would probably still partner with the Park and Rec for the Sunday night through Thursday quality of life, local interaction. But then on the weekends, they would not on day one, but they would build up to where they would run the tournaments. This generates about 5 times more revenue than the rental model. So it can, depending on the structure with the third-party group, if it's incentivized correctly, it's better for them and better for the city if the facility is generating a higher revenue number. It's harder work. They've got to get the teams, but they also get all the registration. They get all the gate, the pay at the door. All becomes kept in-house, not by the promoter. So when you look at those two models, that's kind of the main difference between their performance. Other than that, utilities are utilities, insurance is insurance, maintenance is maintenance. Well, and they are, I'll use this word politely, burdened with the conservative mindset of your community from a capital replacement cost standpoint. City staff did provide that budget number that we put in there, and that was the 307,000.
Do you find that majority are city operated or third party operated?
It's really it's a toss-up.
Okay.
It really is a toss-up. The one thing, and we can help with this, if you structure with a third party, it can't simply be on revenue. And I know this is a little more granular than you want to. It has to have some relevance because you're doing that to bring heads in beds, right? So that where your economic impact hat. To do heads in beds, they're only going to come from out of town to put heads in beds. So it's got to be their reward has to come not just from performance, but performance from those who are coming into town to spend the money. Because I have helped some community that has done that before, and all of a sudden, every weekend, it's a local tournament. Well, that wasn't the purpose of doing this puppy. The purpose was to get people out of town, people to come spend their money in your communities. So and a lot of it, and I mean this very complimentary, has to do with the quality of the Park and Rec department, and I will attest that you would have no problem either way with the quality of what Amanda does over there. So, I think that's, tried to keep this at the 15 minutes because the buzzer's going to go off here, I've been told. We have a strategic partner out of Austin, Texas called Data Impact Source. They help us with calculating, and that's in all those documents we did too. It not only breaks out what they project based on we provide to them the attendance, if you will, and we took a financial model at 50% of the available inventory of weekends a year. So this is representative of a 50% use of the weekends a year, and you can see the 1.3 million in lodging sales, over 12,000 rooms, and extrapolating that out over 15 years, they estimate that it'll have about an $86 million revenue impact into this community from having a sports center of this nature.
I'm sorry, Mayor. Why'd you go with the 50% capacity?
As a bellwether number to demonstrate that you're never going to get to 52 weeks out of the year. Okay, that's holidays get in the way, and September's awful. As sports cycle through, and just so I don't forget, the turf component, as I said a minute ago, is not a tournament capacity. Turf does not travel. So the turf is going to be for your locals. So you can't have a soccer tournament with one field. But we've picked the 50% because it's easily attainable and reasonable. You might get up, many communities get up to 42, 44 weeks a year. And if you don't have your athletic hat on in any particular one sector, which I know Mark does not, cornhole, I think you all did the cornhole, right? Tournament. Come to town, do cornhole, do cheer, do dance, do wrestling. So this is just saying 50% of the weekends are some out-of-town oriented tournament.
But quite a few communities exceed that 50%.
Yes. And again, and I'm on a profile here, and I don't mean it in any negative way, but that's also the other our advantage generally for a third party versus a municipality is third party is driven by evil for-profit capitalism. You know, I mean, they're hungry, and not that Amanda doesn't want to run great programs and be full all the time, but it's, you know, there's not much of incentive to go for 48 weeks versus 38 weeks in any kind of monetary situation. So, and the third party generally, as you would interview them, would have national connections already and regional connections already and aren't starting from scratch. So.
Thank you.
So I know I try to keep it top level. There's 280 pages of reading if you get really granular there in our report. So.
Questions?
So-
Commissioner Glenn?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So my question is, I know you need turf for a full-blown soccer match, and you're just going to use it mainly for practice for local teams. What about a futsal tournament? We have one field over here on Legion. Is it possible to convert some of these to futsal fields? They're smaller than a regular soccer facility.
Yeah, well, futsal is just slightly over a basketball court, and technically it's played on hard court. So you've got 5 futsal courts built into this
So
floor
we
plan.
could just use the basketball courts
Yes.
for futsal. That
Yep.
would be very doable. Okay,
Yes.
because that would be.
Yes.
That would be a good one. The other question I got is, I don't know whether you, since you built so many of these, I'm just concerned, you know, one of the big concerns you've got is you have to look at demographics down the road. And unfortunately, our generation that's living now, they're not having as many kids. And if they're not having as many kids, presumably we'd have fewer consumers using this. Is that a variable you've looked at? Because everybody's dealing with that. School systems are dealing with it. Colleges are dealing with it. I mean, there's just going to be fewer young people out there in the next decade unless trends change.
Yeah, we really have not factored in a reduction of youth. It's more the reduction of the population as a whole. Is there a point that, you know, again, this facility should not be looked at as either youth or elite athletes. It needs to be looked at and in fact branded such, excuse me, and a proactive effort not to brand it as such. I mean, the adult rec leagues that'll be playing in here, the co-ed soccer that'll be playing in here, it's more of a lifestyle usage element than it is age specific. I mean, I always love to tell the story. My wife ran a sports center that I owned up in Wisconsin, and on Monday night she had 30 teams of women's over 30 soccer. Had nothing to do with soccer. It had to do with camaraderie and exercise. And if there was inclement weather, she'd get more calls that say, "Don't you close tonight? Don't you know, we're going to get there." So I think that's, you know, I understand your comment about the youth, but if this is in the broad range, there's still plenty of youths out there in a variety of programming.
Okay, can I ask one more and then I'll be done? Motels, motel proximity. How important is that to the success of one of these facilities?
Well, fortunately, your community is not of the geographic size or challenge that it's a huge factor. I mean, would everybody like to walk over? Sure. Would we like them to walk over? Because then we don't have, one of the issues, you know, one of the considerations is also parking. Because unlike the Sunday night through Thursday, where there's a steady turn and burn of the programming, people come, they do their thing, and they leave, and so then the parking turns over. In tournament situations, they come and stay. And so you have to kind of figure out, okay, for a morning set of bracket or pool play, and those people are coming in at 7:30 and they're not leaving till noon, and we got to have enough room for them inside and for parking. The distance of drive in this community, especially if somebody drove 4 hours to come here, by the way, it's 12 million people in a 4-hour drive. And we call that the donut. You know, the 1 hour drive are going home. The 2 to 4 hour people is who you go market to because they've got to stay. And if they've driven 4 hours driving from one side of Owensboro to the other, it's going to be very minimalistic.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Thank you, Mayor.
So does it take an expert to build these buildings? Is there a company that just, this is what they do, or can any general contractor
Well, generally
read the
speaking, any
plans.
general contractor can build it. It's not that tough. There are sports specialists that have to do with the hardwood and the turf and nets and batting cages, et cetera. Those are specialists. As far as, you know, what really is important, and again, selfishly speaking, you know, the design of them, you know, it's not just a pole barn. It's just not a warehouse. It's more than that. But it doesn't also have to be a hospital. You know, it doesn't have to be way overbuilt. And so again, because we do a lot for the private sector as well, in the private sector, you're trying to minimize that because you got to pay the debt on it. And so we've gotten pretty good at helping folks build a very efficient model that handles the sports, handles the customers and the customer service. But I'll tell you, you know, our star is when they walk out and say, wow, it was clean, it was ran efficient, they ran on time, they were pleasant, it was well lit, well illuminated. I've never had one said, you know, a little more corian there in the men's room, and it just would have been over the top. And also, we are very experienced in understanding what a irritated 14-year-old with a lacrosse stick can do to a building. So we also, not that the gentlemen, you all weren't perfect 12-year-olds, but we designed for mischief and we designed for testosterone.
So you're available for consultation on that
Yes, sir.
type of scenario is
Yes, sir.
I guess my point. When you come to these communities, do the city and the county, do they ever kind of partner, you know, to really, or is it mainly just one or the other?
Well, we've worked in several communities in this state and in other states, and you can flip a coin. Some of them are very like-minded. You know, we did do a project, we were engaged by McCracken County down there, and McCracken County and Paducah at one point weren't really chatting very much. And then they got in, I think they've settled a lot of that. That's an example that we actually told Paducah not to build a center because they had the convention center they were using for 30 days of quilting in August and not much else. And I think they've been, Mark, I think, can contest to this, they're over the moon, but they already had this, I mean, they had a big enough one to put 6 courts in, not just 4, so.
Anybody else? Commissioner Castleton?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, Mr. Gill, I was wondering, where is your closest facility that you guys have built?
Cape Girardeau would be one for you all to look at. It's 125,000 square feet. That was built by the city of Cape Girardeau. We were very instrumental in the design and layout of all of that. I'm trying to think. We do a lot of work on the East Coast. We're doing one in Puerto Rico. There you go, Puerto Rico. That's what y'all go visit that one.
Mayor, I think we ought to go.
What's this we business? Okay. Commissioner Magley?
On the Cape Girardeau property, is that run by the city or is it a third party?
It is run by the city.
is
They
run-
had a very robust park and rec department.
How long has it been going?
2017 it opened. And I know they've been very, very pleased with the outcome of everything. They were a little, and I'll just share this with you too, they were a little misunderstanding of how the tournament industry works when you're trying to get, cities are competing against each other. They don't come in and pay rack rate. I mean, in some cases, they come in and want to be paid to bring their tournament, their economic impact to your community. So when they first started out, I know they had a huge tournament rental number, thinking that all these groups would come in and pay rack rate. And you're competing against every other community that has, you know, a sports center. Or in the case of hard courts, you're competing against other communities that have a convention center that can bring it in on a weekend and put flooring down, run the tournament, and put the flooring up and leave. But I know they've been very happy with what they've done.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hopkinsville as well, correct? Nate, last time you talked to Tab, I think they were very pleased with the performance of what they built.
They built a pole barn, didn't they?
Not quite.
Go ahead, pole barn.
Mayor, so any other questions you have, of course, feel free to ask Norm. So As far as next steps, if you're interested in proceeding, what would be, I think the logical next step is that we would work to continue to refine the scope and get a more refined cost estimate, look at potential locations, look at how to pay for that, and come back in 3 or 4 months with updated information if you're interested in going forward or not.
I would be interested in going forward, but I'd like to speed up the process rather than a quarter of a year. Have to figure this out if at all possible. I know you're busy, but you know, we've beat this horse to death over the last many years, so I'd like to put it on the front burner. Commissioner Cass,
Yeah,
Sanford?
absolutely. I'd like to get it going as fast as possible.
Commissioner Castleman?
Yes, I'm in agreement with that
Mayor Pro
also.
Tem?
Yes, I think so.
Doctor?
Yes, absolutely.
Clearly, then we will proceed accordingly.
All right, and you said it was about 8 million, and that what you said?
Bye-bye.
You threw out 12 to
Hello?
13,
Hello?
but that's awful. And you threw out 12 or 13, is that what you were talking about?
At 88 and 2, so you're probably closer to 15.
15, okay.
Yeah, in the real world. And we can, if it helps, Nick, because I know that variable, 12 to 16, that's a lot of money. We could, we'll happy to submit whatever we need to, but we've got concept drawings that are 90% of what you are looking at. That could be, we could work with local GCs to get a number on fairly quickly.
Another question.
No, yes, Commissioner Castleman.
Have you guys ever implemented any pickleball courts into these facilities?
Yes, pickleball is the fastest growing racket sport in the United States that nobody will pay for. And
They all want to play for free, don't they?
well, because it was scrap time, just give me 30 seconds here. It was always the garbage time. So a church or a municipality would take $5 for 9 a.m. to noon on Tuesday mornings because, whatever, nobody else is using it. Well, then it picked up popularity, and now they want prime time for $5 for 3 hours of play. And now it's gotten to the level where they're all playing on tennis court material. So now they want a special surface and want to pay $5 an hour for it. So pickleball can be played on the hard courts in here without any problem. It is moving to more of a tennis surface, and to keep the pickleball locusts at bay, as the tennis people call them, if you have a tennis court now and you mark it with pickleball, you cannot hold an NCAA or a USTA sanctioned event. And those two governing bodies came down to hold off pickleball from invading their tennis courts. So, but there's no reason you can't have 10 pickleball courts in there.
It's loud inside.
Yes.
It's really loud. Okay, well, Mr. Gill,
Okay.
enjoyed talking to you the other day, and thank you for your presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you all very much.
All right, city project list, city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. As usual, the project list was in your packet, and I emailed that to you yesterday. I would point out there were a couple of new projects added to the page 4 of the list, the York project and the Cravens Pool projects, both of which you've already approved, but now that they're in process, they've appeared on the project list for the first time. Other than that, staff is here to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions from the dais?
Go ahead.
Oh, one, Mayor. The waterfall feature down at the river, is it currently active? I know we were cleaning it out and,
Yes. I think it was intended to be active by July 4th.
okay, all right, because I've had people ask.
They caught a big old catfish in it. Fixed that.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
That could be a Parks and Rec question.
Blindside, Amanda.
I'll get 2 for 1, so you don't feel like you're wasting your trip up there. So, you're gonna replace the playground equipment at Heartlands. That's awesome. And so, I guess that's a pretty quick process. It looks like it is a month.
It should be a pretty quick process. We've been working on it for about 1.5 years as far as the order. Every time I check the website for a ship date, it's getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back from the factory. So currently our ship date for that equipment is July 18th, and I've asked the installer to wait till after school starts and asked him to try to get that in the middle of September. So we hope to get that
Is there anything new,
done.
or is it just a 1-for-1 replacement of like the slide, the swing?
No, I worked with the homeowners association president and gave them an opportunity to kind of review the apparatus that we had there and the play amenities. So we are changing a little bit of the color scheme and some of the activities at that location.
Okay, and then the other question I've got is Craven's Pool, so it looks like we're gonna start that in September. Is that still the plan?
Well, we hope to
I love your
begin.
proposal. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank
I think
you.
It's awesome.
Yeah, the bid's been released. Today we had pre-construction meeting at the site for contractors to come and review the location, ask any additional questions, purchasing, and then Andrew Osborne with Public Works and my pool manager, Jennifer, met there with contractors today from 10 to noon. So we will be expecting bids to be returned early August. And then at that point, we're hoping it'll take about a month to 6 weeks to get a contractor on board. Then we'll get started.
Exciting, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, anybody else have anything they'd like to add to this exciting meeting today? Okay, hearing none, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Could I have a second, please? Second. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We're out of here.